Hello, listeners. This is Lee Price,
This is Will Ford from Football 365.
and you're listening smartly to At the Bridge Pod, a Chelsea FC podcast, although I would describe it as the Chelsea FC podcast.
Magical from Eden Hazard. Kai Havertz in the Champions League final. Ivanovic! In the middle, it's just behind him. But it's swept in by Hakim Ziyech. Matic with the ball driver. Matic takes the net off. Hat-trick hero. Cole Palmer wins an epic, sensational game.
It's time for another episode of At the Bridge Pod, your number one Chelsea FC podcast. Coming up on this episode,
something a little different today, as I got to sit down with Daniel Childs, aka Son of Chelsea, to talk about his channel's origins, talk about his love of Chelsea, and what he has coming up for the future. Oh, welcome back everyone to another episode of At the Bridge Pod. But today we're doing things a little differently in the virtual room, as I call it. I'm joined genuinely by someone very special as we kick off something. I'm calling it In Their Own Words. I might change that title. It might not even have a title in the end. You know what I'm like. But it's basically the series idea that I had was it shined a spotlight on the heartbeat of Chelsea, the heartbeat of Chelsea Football Club. You know, the fans, the social media stars, the ones who live, breathe everything blue from outside of the club perspective as a fan, you know. And whether that's crafting content, stirring up conversation, or just riding the emotional roller coaster of match day, I wanted to hand them the mic to share their story, their journey with the club, and what being a Chelsea fan means to them, all in their own words. And today, I have got a guest who you don't need an introduction because you already know who this is. It's the man behind Son of Chelsea. It's Daniel Childs. I mean, from YouTube deep dives to your razor sharp match analysis, you are one of the most consistent and passionate voices and sensible voices, I want to add, in the Chelsea fan space for years. So welcome.
Oh, thank you for that really kind intro. It's great to be here.
Honestly, and I mean that, you are one of the more sensible voices on YouTube.
I try to be. I mean, yeah. I try to be in the midst of a very mad club.
Well, that is true. Yeah, that is true. I guess that's a good start because, you know, I've got my first question I have to ask. I mean, at the beginning, what's your earliest memory of football? What is it?
Well, there are images of me in like a white autoglass kit, only a couple of years after being born. But my very first memory was being taken to the bridge at the age of 5 for my first Chelsea game with my dad and my granddad, and I think my brother was there as well. And it was the MSK Žilina Champions League qualifier in 2003.
Wow.
I believe it was Roman's first game at Stamford Bridge, but so it was very shortly after the takeover. I was sitting in the West Stand, and I guess it's kind of that classic thing that everyone describes the first time they walk into a football stadium, and especially I guess the football stadium of the club they come to love is this almost religious moment. This really huge kind of seismic image in your head of the big floodlights, the color of the seats, the green color of the pitch, and the players, and kind of everything being so massive, especially at that age. And we were sat quite near the front of the West Stand lower, and the players are warming up. I'd never seen Chelsea players before. I knew none of their names. And my dad just turns to me and he goes, who's your favorite player? And for whatever reason, I point in a certain direction, and my dad just looks down at me and says, that's Frank Lampard. Nice. So then that became my favorite player. So that's kind of one of the coolest stories. But that genuinely, I think, is my first Chelsea memory. Like there's a story of when Zola scored against Stuttgart, of me crying as a baby because literally the whole family erupted in celebration. But that's I think that literally I don't think there's any other memories before then. And you know, I think for a lot of people, especially if you went to the bridge or you went to a football stadium at a very early age, that probably is the one that's most kind of seared in your memory because it's so special.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, I said it on our most recent episode about how I got the chance. I haven't been to a game in 7 years 7 years I haven't, just because of money and other stuff. And I was at the Molineux, and it's this atmosphere, and it's the atmosphere of being inside a stadium, and even more so when it's like your club. I think there's nothing like it, and that's why we have to just be so grateful and appreciative of every match going fan, because we remember what it was like behind closed doors all those years ago. And you just think we never want that again. You know, we know why, but it's just, we've got to remember that if you lose the fans, you lose such a key part of the game. You really do.
No, 100%. I think, the behind closed doors, that period was a very interesting one, especially if from my perspective, obviously covering the club on YouTube and doing daily uploads, even during the first period. Because then once football came back, obviously there was difficulty, but that first initial lockdown period where we had literally no football for 3 months, I think the biggest impact that hits home for me is I don't really moan as much about international breaks as I used to pre the pandemic, because when you've experienced literally months on end with no football whatsoever, you kind of are, I can deal with this international break for a fortnight and then we'll get back to club football.
Yeah. You know what? That's a very good point, actually. Talking of your YouTube, I mean, you've built Son of Chelsea into like one of the most recognised Chelsea fan channels on there. What was the moment when you sort of realised that this wasn't just like a hobby? It was something bigger?
It was probably during COVID, to be honest, because there's sort of two, I guess you'd call it two eras or two phases to the channel. If you look back at the uploads, I started in 2014, in the summer of 2014, and it ran pretty consistently up to, I want to say, the end of 15, 16. And then I went away to uni and I came back and I restarted it in the summer of 2019. And in the spring of 2020, I'd had a massive plan. Like, I want to try and take this to the next level. I'm going to go daily content. And I'd sort of planned out a load of shows. And this was planning everything just after the Everton 4-0 game in March 2020. And so I'd sort of planned everything, with a view of this till the end of the season and beyond. And then obviously literally days later, we have the lockdown and the suspension of Premier League football. So, really from that period, it was, having to find things to talk about for that extended period of time that I just referred to. And it was during that period when the channel really started to go, so much more, viral is not the right word. I guess just like more successful. And, the following I got during that period, especially during the summer of 2020, was probably the biggest growth period I've had, mainly because it was quite a mad transfer window. And it probably was a case of also people craving football, the pandemic probably leading more people online. And yeah, it was during that period really when it went from like 2,000 subscribers to 5 to 10 to 15, all the way to where it is now. So it probably was that moment. There's obviously been other landmarks since then, but that's one that really sticks in my head of kind of going from one level of a channel or kind of following to another.
Yeah, it's such a as well, and I can imagine just how proud you are when you saw that number keep going up, because it's something like we've always said. We look at it a different way, where maybe if we ever had an episode that had like less listeners than we assumed or we expected on a regular basis, it's more so imagine that amount of people listening to you in like a pub or a bar. You'd be over the moon. You'd be absolutely over the moon. I know it's very different, isn't it, with YouTube? Because obviously you've got your ad revenue and all that sort of thing. But it's just absolutely outstanding what you've actually been able to build there. And obviously you didn't do YouTube exclusively. You've worked with Reach PLC and you've contributed to major platforms like football.london. How did you find the transition from like being a content creator to like working with mainstream media?
It was a little bit strange, but I guess the way I sort of entered doing stuff for Football London for a bit was because they were actively looking to get content creators on board. So it wasn't just that summer of 21 when I joined was They were getting Arsenal people on board. They were getting people who covered Man City and Man United and Liverpool. So it wasn't solely a Chelsea thing. And so you were sort of coming in with the understanding that you're coming with a fan perspective. And I think in some ways it wasn't that harsh a transition for me, because I had, I've always been someone who's passionately written about Chelsea as well. It's not just in video and podcasting. I was writing for fan sites like We Ain't Got No History and the Chelsea Echo. Obviously now I do that with Louis as a podcast, Louis Benevento with a podcast, but originally it was a site that Simon Phillips ran way back when Sarri was head coach. So even before I relaunched my YouTube channel, I was writing for them, all things Chelsea, if people remember that site. So yeah, I obviously since 2019 I've been writing for the fanzine. So I've always been writing about Chelsea. It's kind of a consistent thing I do. So it wasn't, in terms of writing articles, it wasn't that big a deal. And luckily, Adam Newson, who was reporter at the time, I became really great friends with him, and he was a great sort of mentor at the time, along with others. Carefree Youth, Scott Clayton was our editor when we were there doing the Chelsea stuff. So all around it, I think that kind of helped, that there were people that you could kind of get on with and work well with. And since then, I've been able to, either cover women's games from the press box, or I went to Australia to cover the Women's World Cup. And it is a weird transition. It absolutely is. As someone who grew up as a fan, and then there is a little bit of imposter syndrome at times when you're either in a press box. Not that I've been in a press box loads of times, but in a press box, or you're in the mix zone post game, and you have to kind of break through that barrier that you're not just a YouTuber or a fan guy, or just a fan who's kind of weirdly found yourself in this environment. You've kind of got to be confident enough to break through that. But I didn't think it was that much of a difficult thing. And I also think that if you look at the landscape of media now compared to what it was a decade ago, I think there's a lot more appreciation for, it sounds bad, but kind of an understanding of bias, or at least an understanding of someone coming in and having a perspective from a fan point of view. Like if you look at The Athletic, that's a perfect example. Like you've got people like Andy Mitten, who's ran the Man United fanzine for a long period of time, who writes for them. James McNicholas, Gunner Blog, writes for The Athletic from an Arsenal perspective. It's quite clear where their allegiances and kind of perspectives lie, but I think they've gained enough credibility that major mainstream publications, I think, see the value of having that for their readership.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, because of how a lot of people go to YouTube and they go to these, obviously like The Athletic and these other like fan blogs for a more tailored perspective for their club. Because obviously, punditry and everything, you get like Soccer Saturday and all that. It's so broad and general that, sometimes you just want to hear about your club. That's what you want to hear about, and you want to hear the angles from that. Obviously, our club. Wow, we've had highs and brutal lows. What's one game do you feel defines your experience as a Chelsea fan? Doesn't have to be a final.
Yeah, it's a tough one to kind of answer, because there are easy answers here.
Yeah, there are,
and there are very easy answers. But then I also do think about those kind of weird kind of moments when, as you say, that there are games that insignificant in like historical significance, that they didn't lead to a trophy, but memory wise, in kind of experience inside Stamford Bridge specifically, always stick in my mind. Like in 2019, I know other people have probably brought this up before, I was in the Harding Lower, not too far from the goal, quite near the front for the Ajax game at Stamford Bridge. And it was one of the most insane games I've ever watched in my life. And when Reece James' goal went in, and obviously you had the backdrop that Frank was in the dugout and we had a lot of young players playing for us, and the comeback that didn't seem possible. Like those are those moments that, stick in your mind. So it isn't always linked to a trophy. I think the Hazard goal that I was there for against Spurs, when we stopped them winning the league, gave the league to Leicester that season. You think about how bad that season was. But I've never seen the Bridge go as mad as that goal. That that sticks in the mind as well. I think in terms of defining, I just can't quite get away from Munich 2012. It's just because I wasn't there, and me and my dad watched it at home, and we had to watch the final. And I think it was the same for the Barcelona semi-final, if I remember right. It was so tense and so nerve-wracking. It ended up being the same story for 2021 as well. We watched it in separate rooms, and when Drogba scored the equalizer, we ended up coming together, celebrating in the hallway, and then watching the rest of the game in the living room. And when Drogba scored the winning penalty, we used to have an L-shaped sofa. So I collapsed on the floor in tears of happiness. My dad turned around to celebrate with me, and he wondered where I'd gone because he couldn't see where I'd gone because I collapsed on the floor. And then because we lived very close to the bridge, it took us like 10, 15 minutes to walk down to the bridge to celebrate with everyone. And I keep on coming back to this with Munich, that I think that it's the one game of football that I still get nervous watching back. There's no other game of football in Chelsea history that I've experienced live that ever comes close. It's just, I think it's the cinematic nature of it, the up and down of it, the fact that in so many ways in that run, it could have gone. There were so many sliding doors moments in that particular run. That's the incredible thing. Like 2021 was emotional and had a very similar reaction from me when we won the Champions League. And of course, in that occasion, you actually can watch my pretty instant reaction to it on my YouTube channel. But that one doesn't quite have the same turns. It was, Chelsea were clearly the best team in Europe that year. We kept clean sheets. We won the final 1-0. We battered Real Madrid in the second leg of the semi-final. The Munich game, I think it so sums up the chaos of Chelsea, of what this kind of bizarre, predictably unpredictable, manic club is at times, and the highs and lows that you can go through in a very short period of time. And because it all happened in a season when everything felt lost in sort of February, and then was revived with Di Matteo at the helm, and JT and Didier and Frank kind of spearheading us to European glory, three players who've been written off. I just think all about that, it just felt like a closing end to that era of Chelsea. If you want to do a Marvel thing, I think it was kind of Chelsea's Avengers Endgame in many ways. And I think that's why, to me, it's still, you'll probably speak to a lot of people, and I feel like I was there for FA Cup, the 2007 FA Cup final with my dad and my brother when Drogba scored the winner. And I think if someone was like, to me, it has to be a game you were physically at. That's probably the biggest win I've seen live. But Munich for me just will always stand out. And I think it's very difficult to see it getting topped, to be honest.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that at all, because it really is. You had the brutal low of Muller's goal, then the incredible high of the Drogba header, and then the brutal low again when Robben's got a penalty because Drogba's foul, and you're like, it was the perfect roller coaster emotional game. It really was, and the fact that we won it as well in their backyard, it is incredible. It's an incredible story as well. Obviously, transfers is always going to be brought up. I have to bring it up. If you could sit down with the club's decision makers, whoever they are, we're never entirely sure who gets final say, but what's one question you'd actually ask them that you'd want to know an answer to?
God. I think right now it'd be, why did you decide to make the squad actively weaker last summer? Is kind of would be my question. I think there are many supplementary questions I could ask after that. There are many broader ones, but I just think the way last summer played out is still, I think is so staggering still in my mind of how bad it was. And I think now you see a lot of people retroactively going back. And again, I think it's maybe the helpful thing if you have a podcast, if you have a YouTube channel, in some ways you have a record of kind of your opinions. And I advise anyone, this is not hindsight. go back and watch everything I said during last summer, even before Enzo Maresca was even appointed. I couldn't quite believe how unserious it was. I couldn't quite believe the scale of mismanagement, the behind the scenes turmoil, the decisions that just from a objective footballing point of view, whether you look at the goalkeeping situation, the sale of Conor Gallagher, the signing of Joao Felix for 45 million, the signing of Keenan Dewsbury Hall, Neil Bath and Jim Fraser leaving behind the scenes. I ended up compiling kind of a funny video that I sent round. I think I eventually posted it somewhere. I think I posted it on X, but it was mainly just like joking around with friends, where I compiled basically like a list of headlines of what happened during the summer. Okay. And I sent it to people, and people would come back to me, but I forgot that happened just in the span of like a couple of months. And I think all of that has led to what we have now with the club, right? Where there seems to be a real disconnect of kind of a reality war going on, where you have not every fan. That'd be silly of me to sit here and say that, right? This is my subjective view, but I think I'm probably comfortable in suggesting that there is a large, sizable chunk of fans who are disconnected and despondent about what they see on a consistent basis with the current club. And then internally, how very different it seems to be, or at least the way it's reflected and projected to media is almost like they're living in an alternative reality to all of us. So I think that's something, and the gaslighting, I think, is a word I've used consistently, because I don't really know how else to describe what I've witnessed over the past almost 12 months now from the club. So yeah, I if that's the one question, but as you could probably tell, there's a lot more, but I think it just would be actively or kind of just clearly making your squad weaker. Just makes no sense to me. There are just so many football decisions that if you approach it with an objective football mind of trying to make your team stronger, they just don't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I remember our own Chris. He said that the chance to win the big summer one, obviously, of 2024 that's just gone, he was like, it will go down as one of the worst ones. It was, I think he quoted the window where we signed Gilabogi. I think, was that Michael Hector window? There's so many names in that infamous window that, I've probably pushed those out of my actual brain for good reason. Right. On that, obviously, when we come back to obviously like the podcast side and the YouTube side, and obviously how they've grown and everything, what do you feel is the biggest challenge of staying relevant with football content, especially obviously with the constant 24/7 news cycle that is social media?
I just think it's being consistent. I think that's the biggest lesson that I've learned and also heard consistently when I speak to other people in this space, is just consistency. It's just putting in those hard yards and being there consistently to react to whatever's going on. I also think in a sense of very much gauging what the landscape is. Like in some ways, what I do is not changed that much. And I don't think anyone is really reinventing the wheel. You're talking about Chelsea, you're talking about football. But I'd like to think what I do has evolved from a production quality standpoint. Like that's something I've always been very passionate about with my channel, is of quality over quantity, and production wise trying to make my show look the best and feel the most professional. That's something I've always been, that's just my background. I went at uni, I studied filmmaking, so it's not, that's probably where it stems from. And trying to kind of just be honest to yourself. That's the only thing I think I've always cared about, of having principles of, if I say something and I believe in something, sticking to it. And that's just not in terms of what I say in front of camera. That's how I operate. I wouldn't call it, I still can't really call it a business because it's not really my full-time job. But in terms of how I deal with certain sponsors, the certain partnerships I'm going to do or not do behind the scenes. So staying relevant, I would say it's just being consistent and being there and being on top of what's going on at the club and lending your voice to it. Because, as you said earlier, like, I'm not the biggest channel, but I know that I've got at least a loyal contingent of people who either listen to my show. Like,
Yeah.
there are people. It's weird because of course I started on YouTube, so I always think of it more as a YouTube channel. But I'm staggered when people I have sort of they just listen to the show. They didn't even know there was a YouTube channel to it. So whether you're listening to it or whether you're watching it on YouTube, it's I think it's important to have those principles and being consistent with them and be honest. That's always something I've strided my very much lent on, is because if things are bad, I'm going to reflect that, and that isn't to say there's nothing ever good about Chelsea and that we can't talk about things that are good, but I can't lie to my audience. It's just something I can't do. I can't pretend something is great when it's not. But then when things are good, and there have been many times like I was pro Sarri, like, and that probably surprises some people. It's like, because it was quite far back now, but I know I'm in a minority. There have been moments when not like I remember when I was at Football London, I still kind of defend Lukaku. So I have opinions that put me in a minority, but I strongly believe them. And I'd say to anyone, as long as your opinions, I think, are honestly and good faith held, and whether I agree or disagree with them or anyone does, as long as you hold them in good faith, I think that's all you can do.
Yeah. Oh no, totally agree. I mean, obviously everyone has opinions, everyone's changed, that's I think that's the difference as well, because obviously there's the content creators like ourselves, and then you've got obviously the mainstream pundits, there's so many, Paul Merson, Thierry Henry, Jamie Carragher, there's so many. Do you feel that they struggle to keep up with how fan-driven content's evolved? Because sometimes, not them particular, but in general, I know pundits can be quite critical of like social media and all that, which I understand, but that's the thing. We do try to be honest, like they're being honest from their point of view. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that they just struggle to keep up with how it's evolved?
I think in some capacity, in many ways, from what I can tell from the way, say, Sky Sports News has even changed from what it was 10 years ago. I think a lot of the media has tried to copy what fan channels have done. I think the problem is, my own personal preference is that I think they've taken some of the worst traits of fan media and just basically gone, well, we've got more famous people in front of camera. And if Gary Neville, Jamie Carragher and Roy Keane act in a way that someone outside a stadium does on a fan cam, look at all the numbers we're going to do. So yeah, but the thing is as well about this and about how this has evolved, like me and Louis recently were kind of joking with each other that in some ways we're kind of veterans of the YouTube kind of football space now, because we've been a part of, like, when I started my channel in that summer of 2014, there probably was others, but literally like the only other two consistent Chelsea YouTubers I saw in the space was Joe Nilzeka and Eunice, who's obviously still doing it. That was it. When you think about how big it is now and how many Chelsea channels and podcasts and sites there are now, it was literally just two other YouTubers. Chelsea space, at least for a period of time, felt very small compared to other clubs. And seeing how it's evolved and how it's changed, it's so, I guess, split and sort of fragmented now, even in a niche like Chelsea, that I think people do come to listen to people and want to have that kind of honest connection. Especially it feels like at the moment people are kind of disconnecting from the game, or feel like the actual game itself is widening from sort of a local match support, or at least sort of a genuine match support. So if they can find that in a community online, I think that's what they gauge. And maybe still, I think mainstream, it's very hard for them to kind of not be that and not be seen as that. If you're the broadcaster that's kind of aggravating fans with changing kickoff times, that legitimacy is always going to be difficult. And it does look a little less so with the pundits, but more if you watch Sky Sports News and they're trying to act like influencers and fan channels, it almost like is watching someone malfunction, because
I know what you mean.
It's kind of Black Mirror-esque. It's kind of like, it's kind of uncanny valley, if you know that phrase. Like it doesn't quite register, because you're trying to do something organic and authentic, which I think many mainstream sites and places don't understand, I think they want content creators. I think they like the idea of it. But I think many of them fail to grasp how those things came to be and why those people gained an audience, and it wasn't manufactured. A lot of it is just organic people putting up their own stuff and gaining an audience, whatever size it is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can totally see your point of view there. I honestly, I really can. Okay, we'll have some fun stuff. I've got some quick fun stuff. So, I thought this was a really good question actually. But if you're locked in a room for 24 hours with just one Chelsea player, it can be past or present, who would you choose, and how do you think it would play out?
See, there are two answers. There is a wacky answer, which is Diego Costa, because he is probably my second favorite Chelsea player of all time. But the only problem, if I have a phone and I'm able to translate, maybe that could be good, because I'd have so many questions to ask Diego. I think the other one is obviously Frank Lampard. Like, just having is probably one of my long term. I guess it's any Chelsea fans. Like, I can't believe there are many Chelsea fans who have a podcast, have a platform, and their long term goal probably isn't to interview Frank Lampard. But that's probably one of my biggest goals of Son of Chelsea, is to one day be able to have Frank Lampard on my show and to speak to him about Chelsea. So I have to say Frank, right? Like, I think as a player, like, greatest of all time, obviously separate part is, the coaching side, but mainly just speaking to him about his Chelsea career. And I think all the questions you could come up with about the 04-05 season, about the years with Mourinho, the years with Ancelotti, and in the later years as well, where he was kind of an elder statesman and finally breaking the record as the all-time goal scorer.
Yeah, that was the one game I'm so happy to say I was there for, when he obviously, we're local to Birmingham, so to get there and be able to watch it we didn't know it was going to happen, but it did, and that was amazing. And you know what, it would be full circle when you obviously, because you will, when you do interview Lampard, because obviously from the moment you pointed at him and was like, favorite player. And you just know it'd be amazing to see his reaction to that, because I'm sure because obviously he loves Chelsea, of course he does. But I think the fans' connection, that's why he came back the second time to manage. He knew what he was getting himself into, and it was like, but it's Chelsea, it's his club, and he's an incredible, very intelligent and incredible, passionate man, and the fact that he is our all-time top goal scorer, it's an honor in itself, because of just how incredible he is. And I mean, obviously he's retired, done management, and there's been some weird, wild post-retirement career paths. But if you had to predict one for a current Chelsea player taking up maybe an unexpected job after football, who do you think it's going to be, and why?
Current Chelsea player. I don't think Palmer's going to go into acting. I don't know. I think I just can't see it at this point, unfortunately, or public speaking. I looking at the current group, I think Cucurella might end up being a pundit, if that counts as a.
No, it does.
He is quite feisty on the pitch, so I can imagine, like, in years to come, whether there'll be a bit of nostalgia. And he'll go back and be a bit of a pundit. I think Reece James will. I believe Reece James is quite into his coffee locally in Cobham. At least I gauged that. I know he goes on Cobham coffee trips with, like, Marcus Bettinelli. So I'm going to say that Reece James is going to open up like a coffee store or something post his career.
That'd be ace.
Which I'd be quite into, to be honest, because I quite like that as well. So.
I always find it mad when people go, oh, like, what was the most weirdest career path? And it's like, it's not weird, but I don't think when George Weah was on loan at us, obviously that's not the time he was obviously winning a Ballon d'Or, but he became president of his country. It's just like, wow. It was just like, wow. And obviously Cesc Fabregas, he's gone into a management. That's not really a surprise. It's Cesc Fabregas.
Well, isn't it? I think it's Flamini, isn't it? Is it Flamini?
Yeah.
He's like a tech, or I don't know what it is, like something billionaire or kind of an engineer of some kind, like really, really wild career change.
Yeah, he his net worth is 25 times more than Ronaldo's.
That is mad.
I think if I read right, he's made more money post career than he ever did at Arsenal and AC Milan, and it's just like
insane.
What? I mean, he's clearly got a knack for it, and he's doing well for himself. I mean, fair play. So yeah, right. Okay, if you've got a pick, this could be great because this could be a change all throughout the season. I'm sure if I asked you at any point in the season. But if you could pluck one player from Chelsea's history in their prime and drop them into today's squad, who's the perfect fit for this team right now?
I think it's got to be Petr Cech, hasn't it? I think goalkeeper, it's such a bad position. It's tough to just pick one because I know many people might be screaming for kind of a striker or a central midfielder or even like a more consistent wide player. But that goalkeeping position, I think just causes, I think it reflects so much how unserious the current situation is. So I'd have to say him because you got to think if Petr Cech's in there, if a more competent keeper is in there, hopefully it increases the level. The alternative would be JT or even like Gary Cahill in that defense, like someone just more experienced and of a senior figure who I think could help that defense. But yeah, goalkeeper for me is just unacceptable how we've allowed that position to become what it is.
Yeah, you're not wrong there. And I love the fact that you didn't go with Eden Hazard because I know a lot of people would just go Hazard. I'm like, I don't think he would be like Grealish at City. That's how I sort of see him. He'd be like neutered from being able to be the maverick player he was.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I just think Hazard, I think of all the runs where he pick the ball up and just go score a goal. You're like, oh, okay. Yeah. Very good at that. He's world class. He really was. I don't know where maybe we might use him in this question, but if you could send one footballer, maybe from Chelsea history, into another sport, who would it have been and why?
One footballer. So just to clarify, is this from the current team?
Let's any time in Chelsea history.
It's got to be Diego into wrestling. I'm a big pro wrestling fan. I think Diego Costa in WWE would be some sight.
He'd need a name though. What was his nickname when he was at Atletico? Oh, that could have been his wrestler name. I mean, you could put him in the UFC as well.
Yeah, I just think Diego in some kind of combat sport would be quite funny.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, I guess Kante maybe as like a tennis player. Because I just think Kante as like the stamina of Kante and the ground he covers. Could you imagine that just on a tennis court?
He'd win
How
everything.
insane that would be if he had the obviously there's a lot of technique to get, and he's one of the smaller players, so he probably doesn't have the biggest serve, but the stamina, I think it'd be very difficult to beat him over 5 sets at Wimbledon.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree there. Right, finally, what's next for Son of Chelsea? Have you got any particular big projects or collaborations in the works that you feel like you want to share? Or
yeah, it's obviously end of the season. Sometimes you think about refreshing things, so that there are a few things that I'm sort of contemplating refreshing and kind of updating as we head into next season. It's a little bit frustrating this year. There isn't really an off season. We go straight into the Club World Cup and then then straight into the next season. So there isn't much of a breather, unfortunately. I wouldn't say this is 100% confirmed, but I have had it in my mind for a few years of starting to cover the women's team pretty consistently. The only reason I haven't is not kind of out of disrespect or a lack of care. It's just I'm someone who doesn't want to half-ass something. If I do something, I want it to be 100% committed and to be serious and to give it the same attention and care that I do the men's team.
Yeah.
So if that's not next season, then I'd definitely be looking to be in place to do it the following season. So that definitely is in my mind. And yes, maybe some short documentary ideas I've had for a long period of time about Chelsea. And in conjunction with that, I've kind of launched it quite recently, my Substack. So doing a lot more written pieces on my Substack on a weekly basis. There'll probably be some other content going up on there as well. So For Son of Chelsea, I think it's also, I think, for the long term, is Son of Chelsea. I in sort of wildest dream or kind of goal for the long term is for it not just be based around one person. I would like to see it become a channel where and a place where other people could come on and give their takes on Chelsea. Because I think, it's not that, my voice, it's not that I don't believe my voice in itself and what I do on my channel is not good enough or kind of I can't lead it to greater places on my own. It's just I think that to make it stronger and to make it bigger, it would be quite cool to have other people on board and to see what they would produce as well. So that's really like blue sky kind of long-term thinking. I think for the short term, it's making what I do currently even better, maintaining the audience I already have, and hopefully just improving it step by step and making sure that it stays within the principles and kind of the way it was built in the first place, which is just being honest and showing my love and care for Chelsea.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, that's why, one of the first people I thought of for like sort of this sort of sit down talk was yourself, because of just how you've gone about everything from 2014. I mean, 11 years, that is incredible. Yeah. That's, I mean, a decade. I know how I felt when we hit 5 years last year, but 10 years, at least over a decade. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is a little bit straight. I mean, I guess in some ways it's not exactly 10 years or 11 years non-stop. There is quite a substantial 3-year gap within there. But I guess, in many ways, even in that 3-year gap, I was doing Chelsea stuff, even if it wasn't YouTube. So, to be around and to kind of, I think what helps is being able to look at the way the environment online has changed and kind of evolved and seeing how it's grown. And, that doesn't mean that I'm kind of out of ideas and kind of out of step with, I think, what could work. It's just, it's quite incredible to kind of look back to when I started and how small the community was and how big it is now. Like, that doesn't mean it's all great, but coming on a podcast like yourselves, or going on to that Chelsea pod, or being able to co-host a pod weekly with Louis Benavente and the people I've been able to connect with, not just in the UK but around the world, it is quite remarkable, really, how massive it is, and I only assume it's going to continue to grow.
I have no doubts whatsoever. Honestly, thank you so much for your time. Honestly, it's been a pleasure.
No worries.
We'll definitely get you back on on our usual episode format. But of course, we did have a little idea. We teased that on Twitter with Twitter, with Jam and a few other people. Like, we should do like that sort of that round the table thing, because it is awesome. When you've got different collaborations with different people, and everyone, we all have our own vibe. We all have our own personality, charisma that we bring. And that's what I really love about watching different, content creators mash together and how they interact, because it's that unique approach, but it's still really good to watch. I think it's always a really good conversation when two
100%
mix together. That's why I'm always a big fan. Like when you've had different people on, I'm always watching those. Like, I just get hooked on them because it's such a really great thing to see the different sides. And obviously we're all different people and personalities, and it's so awesome. Obviously before we go, just tell our listeners where they can find you on socials.
Yeah, thank you, mate. So I guess Son of Chelsea. You can find me on YouTube. Favorite podcast provider, like where you can find this podcast, Apple, Spotify. You'll be able to find Son of Chelsea if you just want to listen to the podcast. Across the socials, whether that's X, Instagram, TikTok, at Son of Chelsea as well. I think that pretty much covers it. You can read my monthly articles in the CFC UK fanzine. You can find my Substack, Son of Chelsea, as well. So all of that good stuff, I think, is pretty easy to find either through my YouTube or on X.
Listeners, that's a wrap on the first episode of what I'm calling In Their Own Words. We hope you loved hearing from a different voice in the Chelsea community, and we have got some brilliant fan and social media guests lined up soon. so stay tuned there. As always, we're proud to partner with Head in the Game, the incredible mental health charity using football to support wellbeing. Head to headinthegame.co.uk to learn more. We'll be back on Friday with our usual winners and losers from Chelsea versus Legia Warsaw. So until then, look after yourself, keep the blue flag flying high, and that's us signing off.
You've been listening to At The Bridge Pod, a Chelsea FC podcast. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram by searching for At The Bridge Pod. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, leaving us a review is always appreciated.